Every choice you make creates a neon echo that resonates through the digital landscape of your life. We follow these echoes to find the stories of survival, hope, and the ultimate triumph of the spirit. Click subscribe now and hear the truth in every single echo. They didn't wait for a quiet moment. They set it into a microphone. My brother's wedding reception. 300 people. A rented ballroom with chandeliers that caught the light every time someone moved. My dad had been handed the mic to give a toast, and my mom was standing next to him, her hand on his arm, smiling the way she always smiled at events like this, like she'd practiced in the mirror. He got about 2 minutes in before it happened. "We raised 2 kids," he said. "One daughter as a daughter. The other one. The other one." He paused. My mom laughed a little. The comfortable kind of laugh, like she knew what was coming. "The other one?" He gestured vaguely toward the back of the room, toward where I was sitting at table 11, which was near the emergency exit and next to my brother's coworkers who didn't know my name. "Well, you can't win them all." The room laughed. Not everyone. Maybe 60, 70 people. But enough that I could hear it clearly from table 11. I sat there for about 4 seconds. I remember counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I picked up my clutch, pushed my chair back, and walked out through the emergency exit. I didn't say goodbye to my brother. I didn't say anything to my parents. I just left. That was 5 years ago. I should back up. Because if I start there, you'll think this was one bad night and one bad joke. It wasn't. That night was just the night it finally became undeniable. Even to me, growing up, my brother Kevin was the one my parents talked about. Not in a cruel way. Not at first. Just in the way that becomes its own kind of cruelty over time, where one child takes up all the space in every conversation and the other learns to make themselves smaller just to fit. Kevin was 4 years older than me. He was good at things in visible ways. Sports, grades, the kind of social ease that made adults light up when he walked into a room. My parents weren't bad people. I want to be careful about that, because it's easy to turn this into a story where they're villains and I'm purely a victim. And that's not quite right. They were just oriented, pointed in one direction, and that direction was Kevin. I wasn't a difficult kid. I wasn't rebellious or a problem. I got decent grades, I had friends, I stayed out of trouble. But I was quiet in ways that my parents seemed to find inconvenient. I thought too much before I spoke. I preferred books to parties. I wasn't interested in the things they were proud of. My mom used to say I was in my own world, like it was a diagnosis. By the time I was in high school, I had developed a very specific skill. I could read the room at a family dinner and know within about 3 minutes whether I would be acknowledged at all that night. Most nights, I wasn't. My dad would ask Kevin about his week, his classes, his girlfriend, his plans. My mom would follow up with enthusiasm. I would eat my food. Sometimes one of them would turn to me near the end and ask something generic. The way you ask a coworker you barely know how their weekend was. "Fine," I'd say. "Good." And then we'd go back to Kevin. I told myself it was fine because Kevin was older, because he was leaving for college, because things would change. Things did not change when Kevin left. They got quieter, because there was less to talk about, but the orientation didn't shift. My parents had built their entire emotional infrastructure around my brother, and without him in the house, they didn't really know how to redirect. They'd call him on the phone during dinner. They'd talk about his college experience, his friends, his internship. I was physically present and functionally invisible. I left for college at 18 with a kind of relief that I didn't fully understand until I was 2 states away. Distance helped. I made friends who knew me outside of the context of my family, which sounds like a small thing, but was actually enormous. For the first time, when someone asked me about myself, There was no default answer waiting to correct me. I was just a person. A complete one. I studied communications. I got a part-time job at a campus radio station that eventually turned into something I was genuinely good at. I started dating someone in my junior year. A woman named Adrian, who was funny and grounded and seemed to find my specific kind of quiet interesting rather than inconvenient. I called my parents every couple of weeks. The calls were polite and short. They'd ask how school was going. I'd say, fine, good. They'd tell me what Kevin was up to. I'd listen. We'd hang up. I'm not saying I had cut them off. I hadn't. I just adjusted the dose. Kept it at a level that didn't hurt. Kevin got engaged when I was 23. Her name was Jess, and she was genuinely lovely, warm and funny, and somehow able to be in a room with my parents for extended periods of time without visibly deflating. I liked her. I still do. The wedding was planned for the following spring. I was asked if I wanted to be a bridesmaid. I said yes. I bought a slate gray dress and got my hair done and showed up and stood in the right places during the ceremony and smiled in all the photos. They put me at table 11. I didn't say anything about the table, because I told myself it didn't matter. That weddings are chaotic, and seating charts are complicated, and it wasn't intentional. I told myself a lot of things that night that I no longer believe, and then, my dad gave his toast. And 60 people laughed. And I counted to 4. And I left. I drove 3 hours home that night. Adrian was waiting up. I didn't cry until I walked through the door, and she looked at my face and said, "What happened?" And then, I couldn't stop for a long time. I told her everything. Not just that night, but all of it. The dinners. The phone calls. The way I'd learned to predict my own invisibility. The way I'd been making myself smaller for so long that I'd started to forget what my actual size was. She listened. She didn't try to explain my parents' behavior, or give them the benefit of the doubt, or suggest I was being too sensitive. She just listened, and then she said, "You don't have to go back if you don't want to." I hadn't let myself think that before. Not as a real option. I didn't cut them off right away. There was a period of a few weeks where I kept waiting to hear from Kevin, from my parents, from anyone, some acknowledgement of what had happened. Some apology, some sign that they understood why I'd left. My dad left a voicemail 3 days later. He said he hoped I'd gotten home okay, and that they were sorry if I'd been upset. If. That word, if I'd been upset, as though there was genuine ambiguity about whether walking out of your brother's wedding because your father made a joke at your expense to 300 people might have been upsetting. I didn't call back. My mom texted 2 weeks later. It said, "We miss you. Kevin says you've gone quiet. Are you okay?" I read it 17 times. Then I put my phone face down on the table and went for a walk and didn't respond. After that, I stopped waiting. I won't describe it as a dramatic decision, because it wasn't. There was no conversation, no ultimatum, no tearful confrontation. I just stopped. Stopped calling. Stopped responding. Stopped showing up to things. It was less a door slamming and more a door quietly closing, and then the hallway on the other side going dark. 5 years. People always want to know what those 5 years looked like. I think they expect it to be one long act of grief, or one long act of triumph, or some clean narrative where I go from broken to healed, in a way that has a clear turning point. It was messier than that, and quieter. I moved cities. Adrian and I got an apartment together, and then a few years later we got a better one. I got a job I liked, then a job I loved, producing content for a media company where nobody had ever heard of my brother, and nobody was waiting for me to be more like him. I made a life that was mine, in a way that my childhood home had never quite felt. I also spent a lot of time being angry, and then a lot of time not knowing what I was, and then eventually something that wasn't quite peace, but was close enough to function. I went to therapy. My therapist had a word for the dynamic I'd grown up in. She talked about family systems, about the role of the identified patient and the scapegoat, about how some families unconsciously designate one child as the problem, so they don't have to look at the actual problems. I'm not going to pretend one word made everything click into place, but it helped to have language for it. I didn't talk to Kevin much either during those 5 years. We weren't estranged exactly. He'd text occasionally, short messages, checking in. I'd reply, briefly. We never talked about the wedding. We never talked about my parents. It was like we'd both agreed to pretend there was a topic-shaped hole in the middle of every conversation, and we were carefully walking around the edges of it. I'd made a kind of peace with that too. Then, 14 months ago, he called me. Not a text. A call. Kevin never calls. I almost didn't pick up. I was in the middle of making dinner, and I stared at his name on my screen for a long moment before I answered. Hey, I said. Hey. A pause. I need to tell you something. About Mom. She'd been diagnosed 3 months earlier. Breast cancer, caught at stage 2. The prognosis was not terrible, but serious. She was partway through treatment. She was doing okay, he said. But she was tired and the house felt heavy, and Dad wasn't coping as well as he was pretending to. Why didn't anyone tell me sooner? I asked. They didn't want to. He stopped. They weren't sure you'd want to know. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why I sat on the floor instead of a chair. I just did. I'm sorry I didn't call earlier, Kevin said. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. But I didn't want you to find out from someone else. I appreciated that, I did. But I also didn't say anything for a long time. I'm not asking you to fix anything, he said. I just thought you should know. After I hung up, Adrian found me still sitting on the kitchen floor. She sat down next to me, right there on the tile. She didn't say anything. She just sat. That night I lay in bed for a long time not sleeping, and I tried to figure out what I actually felt. I expected grief, or guilt, or some rush of urgency to run back. What I actually felt was something more complicated. A kind of sorrow that wasn't about my mother's diagnosis, so much as about the fact that I didn't know how to be someone's daughter in the way this moment seemed to require. I didn't sleep much. By morning, I had made a decision, but I wasn't sure if it was the right one or just the only one I knew how to make. I was going to go. I drove this time. 6 hours, which I did in one stretch with a podcast I wasn't really listening to. I'd texted Kevin the day before. Just, I'm coming this weekend, don't make a big thing of it. He'd written back, okay, one word. That was the right amount. I pulled up to the house I grew up in on a Saturday morning in October. The maple in the front yard was doing what it does in October, which is blaze orange in a way that always looks almost aggressive. I sat in my car for a few minutes. My dad opened the front door before I got to it. He looked older, not dramatically, not in a way that should have surprised me, but it did. He stood in the doorway, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. You came, he said. I came. He held the door open. I walked in. The house smelled the same. That was the thing that undid me a little. Not seeing it, but smelling it. The specific combination of the house I grew up in that I hadn't encountered in 5 years. I stood in the entryway for a second and breathed through it. My mom was in the living room. She was thinner than I remembered, and there was a softness to her face that I didn't recognize. Some of the armor gone, or maybe I was just looking at her differently. She looked at me the way people look at things they weren't sure they'd see again. Hi, Mom, I said. Hi, baby, she said. She hadn't called me that in, I couldn't remember how long. I sat down across from her. Kevin was in the kitchen pretending to be busy with something. My dad hovered in the doorway. Nobody quite knew how to start. I started. "I'm not here to pretend nothing happened," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to act like the last 5 years were some kind of mutual decision to take space. I needed to leave because I was disappearing in this family, and I needed to stay gone long enough to remember what I was supposed to be." My mom looked at the floor. My dad looked at his hands. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said. "I'm saying it because I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen just because the circumstances changed. That's not me being cold. That's me deciding that I actually matter enough to tell the truth about." Nobody argued with me. That surprised me more than anything. My mom looked up. Her eyes were bright in the way that means someone is not going to cry. "But they're very close. You've always mattered," she said. "I know you believe that," I said. "I'm not sure you always acted like it." Another long silence. Then she said, "No, I don't think we did." I stayed for 3 days. It wasn't a movie. Nobody had a big breakthrough scene where everything was resolved. My dad didn't apologize in the sweeping, eloquent way I'd sometimes imagined. He apologized in fits and starts, in sideways ways, by offering to get me coffee and asking what I took in it like he was trying to remember a version of me he'd missed. Kevin and I talked more in those 3 days than we had in maybe 5 years. He told me things I hadn't known. That Jess had been frustrated by the seating chart situation. That she'd argued with my parents about it. That she'd cried after I left the wedding. And Kevin hadn't known what to do. That he'd thought about calling me 100 times and hadn't known how. "I didn't know how to be your brother and their son at the same time," he said. We were on the back porch, night 2, cold enough to see our breath. "You don't have to be," I said. "You can just be my brother." He nodded. "He's not a big talker, Kevin." But I think he understood. I talked to my mom alone once, on the last morning. She was having a good day, energy-wise, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the morning light coming in. She talked about her treatment, matter-of-factly, without drama. I asked questions. She answered them. We were just two people talking. Near the end, she said, "I'm sorry I didn't see you right for a long time." I thought about saying it was okay. That's the thing you're supposed to say. It's the reflex. But I'd spent a lot of years saying things I didn't mean in order to make other people comfortable, and I'd decided I was done with that. "Thank you for saying that," I said instead. "I'm working on forgiving it." She nodded like that was a fair answer. Maybe it was. I drove home on a Tuesday. The maple in the front yard had lost a few more leaves overnight. I hugged my dad at the door, briefly and a little stiffly. We haven't figured out how to hug yet. Maybe we will. I waved to Kevin through his car window. He was heading out at the same time. I played music the whole way home instead of a podcast. I wanted sound without words. When I got home, Adrienne had made dinner. She looked at my face when I walked in. "How was it?" she asked. I thought about how to answer. How it was complicated. Imperfect, real, nothing resolved, but something shifted, some small motion in a direction I hadn't expected. "It was something," I said. "I don't know what yet. But something." She nodded, handed me a plate. I sat at the table we picked out together, in the apartment we chose together, in the life I had made from scratch. When I finally stopped trying to fit into one that was never built for me. I don't know what happens next with my parents. I genuinely don't. I'm not going to pretend I walked back into that house and everything healed cleanly, because that would be a different kind of lie. The kind that sounds better but costs more. What I know is this. I spent a long time being the child in my family who didn't quite count. I spent 5 years learning that I did, in fact, count. Just not to them. Not yet, maybe not ever fully. I built a life around that truth instead of around the hope that they'd eventually see it. Going back wasn't weakness. It wasn't me forgetting what I'd learned. It was me deciding I was solid enough now to walk back into the thing that used to break me and come out the other side still myself. I'm still myself. That took longer than it should have. But I'm here. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually means. Not what it's supposed to mean. Not the clean version I could tell at a dinner party. But what it actually means when I'm honest with myself in the quiet. Here's what I keep coming back to. What happened to me wasn't one bad night. It was 1,000 small moments that trained me to expect less than I deserved. My dad's toast at Kevin's wedding was just the moment it became impossible to pretend otherwise. And the thing about that kind of accumulated invisibility is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a warning. It just slowly teaches you that your presence doesn't quite count. Until one day you find yourself sitting at table 11 near an emergency exit, and you realize some part of you already knew you'd end up there. I think about the girl I was at 23, counting to 4 before she stood up and walked out. She didn't know she was making a decision that would take 5 years to understand. She just knew she couldn't stay in that room one more second. And I think that instinct, that refusal even when it didn't have words yet, was the first truly intelligent thing I'd done in a long time. Not because leaving is always right, but because staying would have required me to agree that I didn't matter. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore, even if I couldn't explain why. The 5 years I spent away weren't wasted. I know some people would look at that gap and see stubbornness, or pride, or a family broken over something that could have been talked through. Maybe. But what those years actually were was practice. Practice in existing without someone else's approval as the measure of whether I was doing okay. Practice in building something, a relationship, a career, a sense of self, that didn't depend on being seen correctly by the people who were supposed to see me first. And Adrienne. I want to say something about Adrienne, because she's part of why I made it through. Not because she fixed anything, she didn't, she was very clear that she couldn't, but because she showed me, consistently and without fanfare, that being known by someone is not the same as being diminished by them. I'd spent so long confusing the two that I'd almost stopped believing they were different. Going back didn't fix my family. I want to be clear about that. My mom's apology at the kitchen table was real, and I believe she meant it. And it also doesn't erase 20 years of being pointed in the wrong direction. My dad is still learning how to apologize in something other than gestures. Kevin is still figuring out what it means to be my brother without performing it. But I went back a different person than the one who left. And that mattered. Not because it changed them, I couldn't control that, but because it proved something to me. It proved that I was solid enough now to walk toward the thing that used to hollow me out, and come home still intact. That's what I learned. Not a rule. Not a lesson you can put on a card. Just this. The work you do in the years when nobody is watching. The therapy. The hard conversations. The slow rebuilding. That work is real. It shows up when you need it. It held me when I walked through that front door and smelled the house I grew up in and had to breathe through the weight of it. I'm still myself. After everything. That took longer than it should have. But I'm here.